Hello. In this section, we're going to talk about corporate crime. When we're talking about corporate crime, we're talking about the following. Criminal act committed by one or more employees of a corporation as part of corporate practices. Now, this is separate from embezzlement, where an employee steals from a legitimate company. This is a situation where employees of the company are knowingly using their company to commit fraud or some other type of crime. All right. So each year, 300 or so corporations in the United States are convicted of corporate crime, and some of these are major crimes, which we'll talk about again in a few minutes, and others are sort of minor violations. Most of the corporations that are convicted are small to medium-sized companies, that is, those that are less than 100 employees. Why are they mostly small companies? Well, because most of the corporations in the United States are actually small to medium size. They're all, among the big corporations we think of, the Exxons, the Chevrons, etc. There aren't that many large corporations. Most corporations are basically small businesses. Okay, so what is a corporation? Well, a corporation is an artificial person sanctioned by the state for the purpose of doing business. Why do we have corporations? Basically, it's there to separate the entity, the corporation itself, from the people who work there. So one of the points of having a corporation, sorry, I'm going to turn my page here, is it basically allows for protection against the employees. So, for example, the liability of the corporation is limited to the investment the corporation within the corporation. So if the company goes bankrupt, for example, and lots of companies go bankrupt all the time, you as an employee are not held financially responsible for the company, even if you are the president of the company or one of the upper management of the company. What I mean is your private property, the home you live in, the cars you drive to work, the investments you have as an independent person, in the stock market, etc., can't be taken by the courts to use to pay off the corporation's debts if you by chance have to declare bankruptcy. Also, if the corporation is found at fault of criminal activity, you can, or even civil activity, you personally cannot be sued, or you can be sued, but they can't take your personal assets like the home in which you live or the car you drive or the money you've put into your retirement account or the money you've put into your kids' college fund, etc. If you are an employee, a single proprietor or employee-owned business that's not incorporated, then you expose yourself to very high levels of liability, because if in the conduct of your business you injure someone or you commit a crime, etc., you are personally held responsible for that action. So that's why corporations predominate, and that's why they're organized the way they are. Now, what are some of the crimes that corporations are commonly sanctioned for? Price fixing. So price fixing is essentially where one or more companies collude to keep a price at a certain level. Now, we all know that it goes on quite a bit. The airlines always seem to have basically the same price. The oil companies, there's arguments that they price fix. They're having some cases. There was an insulin shortage a year or so ago, and there was the insulin producers were suspected of being in cahoots with one another, agreeing not to produce a certain level of insulin or sell it at a certain price. Price fixing is illegal in the United States. The interesting thing is that price fixing is not illegal globally. There are countries where price fixing is just considered smart business. So countries that are involved in oil production and oil trade are openly involved in price fixing. They just say, well, we're going to fix the price of oil at this per barrel, and we're going to fix production levels at this. That is not market competition. United States, that's technically illegal. And most other countries in the world, it's not illegal. All right. What else? Illegal dumping of hazardous materials or environmental crimes. Neglecting safety concerns or issues. I told you the story earlier about, and when we talked about manslaughter, involuntary manslaughter, about the manager of the chicken plant. Well, the chicken plant was found, the manager was acting on behalf of the company, and the chicken plant was found guilty of maintaining unsafe work environment because those workers died in the fire because the fire door had been blocked, and the manager blocked the fire door to keep the employees from sneaking out for a smoke break. Exploiting workers or refusing to pay overtime or having them work off the clock is what it really amounts to. Walmart was caught doing this on more than one occasion. They haven't been caught lately, but they were about 10 years ago. Walmart was caught doing this, where they would just have people work. They tell them go clock out, and then send them back out to work on the floor until their shifts were over with. Until they felt like Walmart felt like they had gotten all of the work they needed done to be done. Well, if you're an hourly employee, that's illegal. That's exploitation. If you're a salaried employee, that's just life in the big city. You signed up for that. But if you're an hourly employee and the boss tells you go clock out and then go back to work, don't do it. That's technically illegal. And then, of course, all corporations lobby and curry favor with politicians in ways that would disgust you if you knew the whole truth about it. Okay, let's talk a little bit about Enron. I am not an Enron expert. What I do know about Enron, two things. One, when I first started here in 2002, Enron there's a big plaque of Enron in the Hankamer School of Business here at Baylor. That's no longer here. So I've got a film I've asked you to watch about Enron that will tell you the whole story. Enron was trading something called energy rights. I honestly don't understand why anybody would trade energy rights. I'm not really sure how you trade energy, because energy is not something, it's not like buying a barrel of oil. You were literally trading electricity. I'm not really sure how those markets operate. Somebody smarter than me figured out how to make money off of it, that's for sure. So Enron declared bankruptcy in 2002, and they had $31 billion in debts. How they went about structuring their bankruptcy is really what was part of which was just flat out criminal. So the executives were accused of hiding their company's bankruptcy so that they could profit. In fact, Ken Lay had told employees everything's fine, don't sell your Enron shares. Now, employees at Enron were paid, a salary, but their retirement, they didn't get money put into a 401k. They were offered company stock instead. And in the early days, that seemed like a great deal because Enron stock was soaring. But as it turns out, Enron went bankrupt and the stock was worthless, and so all of those people who worked there lost all of their retirement savings and they had to start over again. So there's a little bit of that. The CEO of Enron was a guy named Ken Lay, who died of a heart attack before his trial. He was in Aspen, Colorado. He made $103 million selling his Enron shares at the same time he was telling people not to sell because he knew the company was getting ready to go bankrupt. The Enron film you watch will tell you about the role of Arthur Andersen, which was back in the old days, there used to be like 7 big accounting firms, and it's now down to a few. Arthur Andersen used to be one of those big 7. And Arthur Andersen disappeared because of Enron. They were the outside auditors and accountants who allowed Enron to cheat and allowed them to get away with it for kickbacks. And so Arthur Andersen went bankrupt and out of business because of that as well. So BRX Minerals, or BREX Minerals, this is the company I told you about. What they did was stock manipulation. And what they were trying to do is drive up the value of their stock in a way that was, just fraudulent. What was BREX? They were a company that mined almost exclusively for gold, and they were mining for gold in Indonesia. And what they were trying to claim is that they were close to finding a big vein, a big vein of gold. Gold is something that the world just goes gaga over, and if this company had found gold, it would have been a major financial boom for them. And so what they did, though, is that they weren't really at risk of ever finding gold because there was no gold where they were digging. They went out and got their hands on as much surplus sort of scrap gold, like you get from these gold buyers. You can take your grandma's old necklace, gold necklace, and sell it at Mike's gold shop, whatever. There's a couple of them here around town. You can sell old gold crowns off teeth. That's kind of gross, but old wedding rings for divorced couples. Who knows? People are selling their gold. All right, it's a little macabre. Anyhow, they went around. They got all of this gold. And what they did was they actually had a place in Indonesia where they were digging. And so between digs, they would go out there and chum the earth. They would take that gold and they would put it in a shredder. And some gold's very malleable, and it can be picked apart and broken up. And they would break it all up, and then they would dump it in the spot where they were digging. And then, the next day the guys will come out and dig and they find a little bit more. That's how gold is found, is just through trace, and then you find a little bit more, then you find a little bit more, then you find the big vein. You keep digging. And so they just kept telling their stock, they were shaving the gold products and chumming the earth with these little gold flakes. And they kept saying, yeah, it's real gold. We're getting close. We're getting close. And so what they were doing was stock manipulation. And they kept reporting this trace evidence they were finding, which they had planted. Of course, they were finding it. And it drove up the value of their stock from it. Originally, that company was trading at $6 a share, and then it went up to over $200. Okay, $250 a share at the end of the day. And of course, eventually, you got to produce something, right? And they couldn't produce gold, and it turned out the whole thing was a hoax. It was just a fraud they had perpetuated on their stockholders and in the stock market. And so it's a Canadian company, and the people in charge there wound up going to jail for doing so. Lastly, on the list of the most notorious swindler of all times, a guy named Bernie Madoff. The Madoff film you need to watch if you haven't watched it already. It is amazing what happened. Bernie Madoff swindled $65 billion from investors that were his friends, that were people that trusted him with their entire life savings. And Bernie Madoff did it through what's known as a Ponzi scheme. What is a Ponzi scheme? A Ponzi scheme, this is the Cracker Jack box version of what a Ponzi scheme is. So in order to make money in a Ponzi scheme, you have to have investors willing to invest with you. And what you do is, and you could either A, do the hard work and invest the money and have it eventually pay off, but that's no fun. Or you can B, promise people these great payoffs, these high rates of return at low risk. And what you have to do in order to guarantee those high rates of return is to find more and more investors. And the number of investors you need to make this Ponzi work grows exponentially. So, let's take, for example, you get money from investor A, they invest in your idea, and you promise that person a decent return on investment, let's say 10%. Now, most Ponzi schemes don't promise 10%, they promise like 20% or 25%, all right? They got to get the people involved, and the greed takes over. Greed will just take rationality and stomp it to the curb. Okay, so people see big return on investment, and all of a sudden, all rational thought and common sense goes away, and they start to believe everything this guy is saying because they really want to believe they're going to make all this money. So he's got investor A, and now it's time to pay investor A. But all he's done is take investor A's money, and he hadn't done anything with it but put it in his pocket, which is what Bernie Madoff did. So then he goes out and he finds a couple of more investors, typically B and C. And then investors B and C each give him, say $25,000. And he takes that $25,000 and then he pays investor A his 10% that he promised him. And then he pockets the money, the $25,000 he got from investor A, the $25,000 from investor C, the $25,000 from investor B, and the only thing that's left is he's got to give the 10% that he owed investor A. So he has to pay that, but he pockets all the rest of that money. Well, now it's time to pay investors B and C. What does he have to do? Okay, now he's got to go out and find investors D and E and then F and G to cover investors B and C's response. So it's a pyramid. You start with A at the top and then the more money you take in, the more investors you have to find. Well, this is a Ponzi scheme. Now, typically what happens is that the con man, the confidence man, will get to the point where they've got enough money and they just pocket it and leave town. And there is a case involving a Baylor graduate. I think his last name is Stanford. I want to say Mark Stanford. Maybe that's right. But he is a graduate of Baylor. He, I think, is either the second or the third largest Ponzi scheme operator in terms of profit and money swindled in U.S. history. He's also currently in prison and probably will be for the rest of his life. But what he stole was chump change compared to what Madoff stole. And so Madoff was brilliant. He just decided, you know, I'm going to promise people small returns, modest returns. Not big returns, but modest returns. And he got people to invest. And their friends found out, oh, I'm investing with Madoff. You should give him a try. You know, it's steady money. It's not, you know, you can trust the guy. He's not promising the moon. He's just promising you a steady 10% return. So I like to call the Madoff scheme, I like to talk about it in terms of the sociology. How did he use what good sociology to get all of these people to give him their money? And when you see the film, you will see people who gave him money, and you're going like, one of them was the owner of the Philadelphia Eagles. These are smart people who've been highly successful in business, but they were all swindled in by Madoff. And so he used what I call the sociology of Ponzi schemes, or the sociology of Madoff, because Ponzi was a guy's name, and it should now be called Madoff, not Ponzi, because he got so much money. One of the things that Bernie did was he traded on status. And what sociologists will tell you is that people want to be liked and respected. In other words, they want to have a sense of a high position of status and respect in society. Okay? We all want to be important. And Bernie Madoff was a guy, he founded NASDAQ. Okay? You've heard of NASDAQ. They report every day 3 big stock tickets. The Dow Jones, the Standard & Poor's, or S&P 500, and NASDAQ. Those are the big three reports given on every business report each day. Bernie Madoff founded NASDAQ. And so Madoff would initially reject clients seeking to invest with him. He would say, you know, I'm not sure you're really our kind of investor. I'm not sure you're really the cutout for what we have going on here. So he played on their status. Oh, and that just made them more eager to invest money with him. Like, oh, wait a second, is he telling me I'm not good enough to invest with him? Oh, you got to take me now. Yes, I am. I'm the right kind of investor. Well, maybe so. Let's see. Let's talk about it. And he had him hooked. The whole time he had planned on getting him to invest. Secondly is the concept of trust. Okay? We are all information-seeking beings. And we all want to make the investments and make behavior decisions that reduce our risk in our lives, whether it be in money, school, marriage, children, car to buy, whatever it is. You're going to gather as much information as you can in order to make the best decision you can. The same thing can be said about investments, right? And so Ponzi schemes rely on trust, and trust is a really important thing because we have all this information out there that bombards us every day, but we like to go to the sources that we trust. And who are the people we trust the most? People we know, and people we know that we trust and value their opinion about things, that we know that would not lead us down the wrong path. So when big time people were investing with Bernie Madoff, everybody felt safe. And so when your friends who are highly successful tell you, yeah, this is a safe investment, why don't you join us? Why don't you also invest some money with Madoff? That's how he did it. He used trust. He used status. He played on people's pride by telling them, yeah, maybe you're not really Madoff material, or maybe you are. Let's see. I don't know. Let's think about it. He used trust. And he also used reasonable expectations, which is something most Ponzi scheme guys don't do. And that's why nobody thought this was a Ponzi scheme, because he was promising modest growth, not outrageous numbers, not 25% annual growth or something crazy like that. He was promising somewhere around 10% a year. And in many years in which Madoff operated this Ponzi scheme, he got very lucky because his portfolio, because there really wasn't any investments ever done, was underperforming many of the other big portfolios out there. But that was always his shtick, right? Well, yeah, you're not getting 20%, but I never promised you 20%. I promised you safe, conservative investments that would guarantee you 10%. So you can stick with my program, or you can switch to one of these, fly-by-night groups. That's up to you. But if you stay with me, you'll be safe, but I guarantee you the 10% growth. And people are like, yeah, it's better to have bird in the hand than two in the bush. Bernie's right. We'll stick with him. This is the safe route to go. Well, it turns out Bernie was just making it all up. He could not guarantee any growth whatsoever because he wasn't investing any of their money. He was actually putting it in the bank. And of course, at some point, he was taking the money that he was getting in to pay off investors, right? The whole Ponzi scheme. He had to keep paying the people. He guaranteed them 10%. He had to give them 10% from somewhere. So he was getting new investors to pay the 10% he owed people. Finally, a professor at MIT who had been, hey, you should look at Bernie. One of his friends had invested money with Madoff and tried to recruit him into the thing, and it handed him all of Bernie's materials and all of his highly complicated looking stock data and stuff and how he had come up and how it performed. Well, this guy was a data monkey professor at MIT, and he just took that information that Bernie was passing out and said he did an analysis of it and decided there's no way. These numbers don't add up. And several times he went to the SEC about it, and they told him, you're crazy. Bernie Madoff, he's not a Ponzi scheme guy. He's one of the most respected people on Wall Street. Get out of here. Well, it turns out the guy was right, and they eventually did catch him. And in the video, you'll see all of it, and it's spectacular. And you feel bad for the people who got swindled, and some people got hurt worse than others. But my gosh, this was the biggest Ponzi scheme ever pulled off, to the total of $65 billion.